Welcome to First Reading, the Old Testament lectionary podcast for all lovers of the Hebrew Scriptures. I'm Dr. Tim McNinch. I'm assistant professor of Hebrew Bible at Christian Theological Seminary.
Did you have to think about that for a second?
I did have to. I'm still getting used to this whole Dr. McNinch thing.
Yeah, I suppose. It's so fun. I suppose I should say my name. I'm Reverend Dr. Rachel Wren. I teach biblical studies at Trinity Lutheran Seminary at Capital University. We are bringing you teaching insights, preaching tips on the text for October 6th, 2024. And Tim is up this week. So where do you want to go, Tim?
Yeah, well, I'm going to do the Psalm.
Yeah, I love it.
Figured I'm sitting here with a Psalm scholar. I might as well dip into the Psalm. And actually, there's a couple reasons why I want to do Psalm 8 as our text. The first reason is the other reading for us. The first reading is from Genesis 2. And we have a really good episode on that excerpt from Genesis 2 that I kind of hosted, I guess, about 3 years ago. I'm kind of proud of that one. So go back and find that one. It was pretty good.
Awesome.
And in all these years that we've been doing the podcast, we've never done an episode on Psalm 8.
So I had the same reaction because 2 weeks ago I did Psalm 1 and I had the same reaction. I was like, oh, we must have done this one already. And we have not. So we got a lot of Psalms to go through.
So here we are. And if I had to guess, I would say probably Psalm 8 is what, your favorite Psalm in the whole Bible or something like that?
So funny enough, it's not one of my favorites, actually. So I'm ready for you to make it one of my favorites today.
All right. Well, give me a little of your hesitation. What is it about Psalm 8 that rubs you the wrong way?
It's so anthropocentric. What are mortals that you are mindful of them? You have made them a little less than angels. I hear that one often cherry-picked and put next to Genesis 1, and with this idea that, humans were the only thing that God called very good. And it's like, actually, that's not right. God made humans, and then it was complete, and God called all of creation very good. So I prefer texts that put us in our place a little bit more than elevating us. I think we do a pretty good job of elevating ourselves.
Well, that's a great way to start out then, with a little bit of a preaching pitfall.
Yeah.
Of not using this psalm as an excuse to glorify ourselves and to puff ourselves up, but to find where the worship is in this.
Yeah.
And where an appropriate place for humanity's role in the cosmos might be.
Yeah.
So we'll go forward with that in mind and see if you find something lovely here in Psalm 8.
Perfect.
So I'm going to try to do a little bit of our typical first reading nuggets of context, a little bit of help with the Hebrew, some of those preaching pitfalls, and then maybe a preaching angle, if I can think of one by the end.
Cool.
So a little bit of context then. It's hard to give context to Psalms, but at least literarily here, we're near the beginning of the book of Psalms, Psalm 8. So you don't have to dig too far into the Psalms to get there. However, this is probably one of the later Psalms to be composed. There's some features here. It refers to the name of God. It has a sort of name of God theology, which is a kind of late development within the biblical world. It also has a kind of universal scope that God's the God of everything, which is also a later concept. And it seems to have, you mentioned that often this is preached alongside of Genesis 1. This psalm seems to have a bit of Genesis 1 on the brain. And, that comes from a kind of priestly scribal tradition that is also kind of late-ish in the composition of the Bible. So as far as context goes then, we can kind of think of this as one of those poems that is kind of reflecting back on the whole context of the biblical tradition up to this point.
Yeah.
So it's a bit reflective in that way.
I
guess the other context would be, genre-wise, like to state the obvious, this is a poem.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And
exactly.
You all out there have probably heard me say this a lot, as far as preaching poems. I always feel like you can only do so much exegetical analysis of a poem before it starts to lose its poetic quality. The the work of poetry is to evoke things
Yeah.
in us and from us. So if you're preaching this text as your sermon text, well, let it be a poem. Let it evoke what it's
Yeah.
gonna evoke, and then run with that.
Yeah. What are some of the images that you see evoking coming out of this psalm?
Yeah, I mean, it's pulling in all sorts of imagery. There's kind of the image of the night sky
Mm.
and the sense of humanity's smallness in this vast, powerful, majestic creation. There's the wonder that the psalmist has that the maker of all of this would even think about humans at all. Like,
Mhm. Mhm.
why would God even spare us a thought? And yet, we insignificant ones have, as you were mentioning before, this almost godlike presence in the world, and trying to figure out what that's all about is here in this poem.
Mm.
A sense of responsibility to govern the other creatures. Um, you know, funny enough, as I was reading through this, the image that really captured me, and I'm not sure why, is in verse 3 in English. This is one where the verses are +1 in Hebrew
Okay.
because of the superscription. But in English, in verse 3, it talks about the work of your fingers. I When I look at the heavens,
Mhm.
the work of your fingers. And something about that work of your fingers kinda caught my attention and
Yeah.
set me on this little rabbit trail.
Yeah.
I actually looked up to see where the word finger shows up in the Bible, and it's actually not that common of a
Mm.
word. Half of the occurrences of finger are in Leviticus,
Oh.
and instructions for the priests, like, dip their fingers in blood or in
Yeah.
oil and splatter it
Yeah.
on the altar, sort of like a biblical Jackson Pollock painting, right? But it's in the context of this solemn, like, ceremony of this liturgy of worship. The use of the fingers for that is explicitly
Yeah.
called for. There's a couple times in Isaiah where the prophet's bashing the priests of the nations because they've built these idols as the work of their fingers,
Fingers. Yeah.
which is interesting. I mean, again, it's like religiously significant work that's being done.
Yeah.
And the other time where finger comes up prominently is in a couple places where it talks about the giving of Torah, the instructions, the law of Moses. These tablets, these stone tablets are inscribed by the
God's own
finger of
finger.
God.
Yeah.
So here we have like this important
Oh, wow.
precise work that's done with the fingers.
And
So
all religious context too, it's the
mhm.
either the idols or Leviticus or the Torah. That's fascinating.
Yeah, so somehow the fingers, I mean, we get the phrase, the hand of God or the work of God's hands. That's pretty common, but it's in these few occasions that it specifies the work of God's fingers or
Mm.
the work of people's fingers.
Mhm.
In either case, this sort of finger work
Mm.
implies a kind of precision to it.
Yeah.
There's an
Yeah.
intricacy of the labor that's involved. And that's what the poet says when they look at the night sky, they see finger work,
Huh.
the work
I
of God's fingers.
I wonder if it's like the placing of the stars, like the precision that would need to be is that kind of what you think is going on there or
Yeah, yeah, like they imagine God taking God's time
Yeah.
very precisely. This isn't just sort of thrown up there. This is like this little bit's put there, this little bit's put there.
Oh, that's lovely.
It's an interesting way to think about the created order as this careful project of the
Yeah.
creator.
Yeah, and so lovingly tended too, you
Mhm.
don't do something with precision unless you really care about it.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. I don't know. I mean, maybe this whole finger work thing isn't the image that's gonna energize everyone's reflective imagination, but, if you're thinking of preaching this poem, then read it out loud to yourself and see which phrases kinda capture your imagination and run with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and I would say the other thing I would say is, poetry is meant to be read aloud, it's also meant to be heard, so ask someone else to read it and just listen, and as they
Mhm.
read it, see what jumps out to you too, so
Yeah. So that's if you're in a routine of sermon prep that feels kind of like you're just, you know, turning the gears
Mhm.
and going through the same sort of factory process of sermon creation. This could be a different kind of process of just meditation and seeing what the Spirit stirs in your imagination.
Yeah, I love that idea. So what, you said you were kinda going through our basic context
Mhm.
here, so is that make Hebrew helps come up next? Do you have any Hebrew things you'd lift up?
Sure, sure. So, full transparency here. I spent some time, probably way too much time, as I was prepping this with the Hebrew in this poem. And I could go on for a long time about that, but I'm not going to. I'm just gonna sort of flag one thing.
Okay.
You brought this up as you were talking about this earlier. Um, this poem seems to have a lot in common with the first creation story in
Mm.
Genesis. But I actually pulled up Genesis 1 and put it side by side with this, and the Hebrew is very different between these 2, poems.
Huh.
Almost every single key term in Genesis 1 that is alluded to here in Psalm 8 uses a different word for it.
Huh. That's interesting.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just a few examples. You have in Genesis 1, the chaos out of which God makes creation is described as tohu vavohu, the sort of, how do we translate that?
Chaos and void, formless and void.
Yeah, formless and empty, whatever that is, right? And here, the stronghold of creation that God has made comes from infants and babies. There's,
Which are also very chaotic.
yes, Onelim ve'yonkim. I sort of like out of the babble of babies, you
Yeah.
know, from the baby babble, God creates, all of this.
Huh.
In Genesis 1, over and over, everything that God does is declared or recognized to be good,
Mm,
tov.
mm,
Whereas here it's adir, noble,
mm,
wondrous.
mm,
Several others, just even, the birds in Genesis 1 are oaf, here they're tzipor.
mm,
The wild beasts in Genesis 1 are chayat aretz, here they're behemot sadeh,
hmm,
et cetera, et cetera. Even the person in Genesis 1 is Adam, here it's Enosh,
mm.
and the responsibility they're given in Genesis 1 is to rada, to, like, rule, whereas here it's mashal, to govern.
Ah, interesting.
There's several others, I won't bore you all with them, but it's just interesting that I I wonder if the poet here has Genesis 1 in mind, but is intentionally, like, using different words
Yeah.
in order to sort of, like, make a remix
Yeah.
of Genesis 1
He's
and have it.
sampling. They're
Yeah.
sampling Genesis 1.
And have it sorta hit the ear in a new way and sort of provoke
Mm,
a new kind of reflection on that
mm,
probably familiar tale of creation. So I sort of was thinking it's a little bit like if you've been reading the Bible in one particular English translation for years and years, and then you read a familiar passage in a translation that you don't normally use, it awakens something in your
yeah.
recognition of the text.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know if that's what the poet was doing here, but it maybe.
I like that. Well, and I don't know if preachers would wanna go this far, but it could be fun to if you're gonna preach on this, to find 3 very different translations of it and read all 3 of them and then preach, because that'll wake ears up and evoke an experience.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I have to be I'm not sure how all of this fancy
I
Hebrew
know.
stuff will make it into a sermon, but thinking about this poem as a kind of, remix of Genesis
Mm.
1, maybe there's something you could do of a retelling of creation
Mm.
that would fit the flavor of this poem.
And the flavor of your community, if you think
Yeah,
about it that
yeah,
way too. Uh,
mhm. Well, we hinted at a preaching pitfall, maybe we should go there a little bit.
yeah, there's a couple here. What did you find?
Mhm, mhm. So the first one you mentioned at the beginning of the episode about how, this seems to elevate humanity to this really prominent position, and in some ways, it could be read as a kind of, excuse to dominate the rest of creation,
Yeah,
just sort of trample it under feet,
yeah.
and, I don't know that that's really what this poem is going after. After all, it starts out with recognizing how small humanity is in the
Yeah.
mix.
Yeah.
Like, we are so insignificant that why would the creator of all this vast, powerful, glorious creation even spare us a second thought?
Mm.
That's sort of our natural place, you might say. And yet, we do have like outsized influence on
Mm.
what happens on this planet.
Mhm.
And that's, I mean, aside from the Bible, that's just something we can see, right?
Right. Right. That's just
For
reality.
better or worse,
Right.
and lots of worse,
Yeah.
humanity, has a large footprint.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I think what this poem is calling humanity to is to take that footprint seriously,
Mm.
and as a divinely given responsibility of care for this beautiful, finger work
Mhm.
of God.
Yeah.
Like, if God cares about it so much to invest finger work in
Yeah.
it, then whatever, delegated responsibility we have to govern the creation, we better take that seriously and put a lot of care into it.
Should be done with finger work as well, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. If we are the image of God, if we're somehow to reflect God in the world, we should take the same kind of care
Yeah.
with creation that the maker of it all has taken in
Yeah.
putting it together in the first place.
It's an interesting juxtaposition thinking of the body images between feet, like this is under our feet versus God's finger work. Which one of those are we going to privilege? What,
Mhm.
our feet which stomp or our fingers which tend and care for lovingly. So,
Right. I mean, there is that phrase there in this poem about, "You've put all things under their feet, under the
yeah.
human's feet."
Mhm.
Tachat raglav.
Mhm.
Which, I mean, it sounds to me that image, makes me think of, like, trampling.
Yeah.
They're under our feet. But, I don't even know if that's really what the poet was going for with that image either. There's only a few places where under the feet comes up in the Bible as a whole, and most of them aren't about trampling.
Yeah.
They're about, like a certain path or a coming from far away to a close place where the closeness is right under your feet,
Mhm.
sort of thing. And so I wonder if that image here is kind of rather than all of these creatures that are named here being no concern of humans, like we're distant from them. No, God has brought them right under
Mm.
our feet
Mhm.
and says to us, "These are mine. Now take good care of them."
Yeah. Yeah. That's a beautiful kind of call to uh, shift our understanding of our relationship to the created world as a creature,
Mhm.
as creatures ourselves who are called to care for the creatures around us. Mm,
Yep. And really that would probably be the angle that I would take for preaching
mm,
this. I would turn this poem that's often interpreted, like you were saying at the beginning, as an excuse to lord it over the rest of the created order. Instead, I think this is a call to careful, delicate, fingered type work
mm,
of care and stewarding of the creation. And
mm.
there's kind of some really wonderful imagery to bring that home.
Look at you drawing out the body imagery in a psalm. I just feel like, oh my goodness, this is amazing.
I've learned from the best. Sure.
No, but really, that's a beautiful I mean, truly, you have brought new light to this psalm for me in a way that I don't I won't be able to think about this psalm or the night sky without picturing the kind of delicate sort of placing of diamonds, in that beautiful blackness. So thank you for that, Tim. That was wonderfully done.
Sure thing.
Folks, I hope you take up the call to preach this sermon and preach on this text. You will not regret preaching from the Psalms, and you might even enjoy it. So jump in. If you are looking for other Psalms to preach on, or other texts to preach on, or just want a resource that you can give to people who have questions about the Bible, head on over to our website, firstreadingpodcast.com. You'll find back episodes there. You'll find merchandise. You'll find ways to donate if you'd like to support what we do here. And we are very grateful to all those who not only listen, but support. And we're also grateful if you just listen as well.
Yeah.
If you have feedback for us, you can send us an email at
There.
firstreadingpodcast@gmail.com. I'm Rachel Wren.
I'm Tim McNinch. Thanks for listening. Have a great week.